it's Anthony Chadwick on another episode of VETchat, the UK's #1 veterinary podcast. I'm really honoured and a tiny bit starstruck to have Kirra Balamanno on the line today on the podcast. Those of you listening on or watching on our website, the Webinar Vet, you will see that I'm in my t-shirt from my marathon that I ran 19 years ago. And it's to really also welcome and introduce Kirra, who is a ultra runner. I mean, marathons aren't far enough for you, are they, Kirra? That's just like a little stroll in the park.
Well, I think marathons are a different league with their speed. But hey, nice to meet you, Anthony, and I'm honoured to be here as well.
Well, Kirra, it's great also. I mean, and you're following in a tradition of vets who do crazy things or are exceptional athletes. Obviously, we've got Laura Muir, who's well known, I'm sure, to a lot of the veterinary community, but you're also a vet. Tell us a little bit about your background. I noticed the accent has a touch of Antipodean about it. So maybe tell us a little bit about the background, how you got into veterinary and how you got into running.
Yeah, for sure. So you picked up on the accent. I'm originally from Australia, but now I'm a bit of a, I guess, world child. Spent the last 8 years or 9 years traveling around the world. And that's been for veterinary and for my ultra running passions. I started off studying at UQ in Australia and graduated in 2013 and worked in Oz for a few years before heading over to do the UK locum thing. And alongside my like veterinary studies, I started running ultras and doing pretty well at them, and just loving that as much as I loved learning veterinary medicine and practicing. So I've kind of just carved a path that has fit both of these passions into one life, which has been like a little bit of a different way to go
Brilliant.
about my veterinary career.
Obviously, Kirra, I used to find running and I still do, a therapeutic way, after an evening busy surgery to go out, go over the day, etc. I found it a good way of blowing away the cobwebs, but also just for headspace as well. Um,
Mm.
but of course, when you're running long distances and also training to be a vet, I mean, that's a huge amount of hours. How did you manage to fit everything in? I was going out and running for half an hour maximum. I guess your training runs are a lot longer than that.
Yeah, I was, I guess, yeah, kind of managing it. Maybe not very well. There wasn't much else in my life apart from the vet and the running side of things, to be honest, for quite some time. Because my training weeks would be probably around 20 hours a week. And then, yeah, vet school is like, it's not not a walk in the park either. So I used to get up sometimes at 3 a.m. before uni to go for my long runs, and get long runs in on the weekend, training, yeah, whenever I could. So I became really good at managing my time, but in retrospect, maybe burning out a little bit.
Yeah. So, I mean, how long would you be out? You'd be out for 2 or 3 hours on a run. So you'd be running sort of 20, 30 kilometers at a time.
Yeah, it really depends on what I was training for and just my training for the day. So I do like 1 to 2 long runs a week, and they could be anywhere from 2 hours to 6 hours. I think even longer now sometimes.
Yeah.
And then you'd have shorter days where you're doing more quality sessions, like interval training and stuff that you probably know from your marathon days.
Yeah, no, definitely. So it's interesting because, as you say, it probably depends on the event that you're doing. Because some of these events are over several days, aren't they? It's not just a 1 day event. It can go on for a long time. And I know that you also have that love for the mountains. So you are often in the Himalayas or in the Caucasus or wherever.
Yeah, so running like in the mountains, long distances brings this incredible sense of peace and I think a self confidence and calm to my life. And that really helped me, especially when I moved to the UK and was locuming. I was doing some pretty um, stressful jobs, like working as a night vet in Oxford at the 24-hour clinic in the emergency department, sole charge. And yeah, that's not such an easy thing to do, but yeah, having this like peace come with me traveling back from Nepal is it was really good for handling stressful situations and keeping my cool.
Yeah, I think that's really important because we obviously have problems with stress in the profession, and the long hours can have something to do with that. And obviously, working at night, I think, is difficult because often the cases are emergency cases. So very much, it's a resilience that gets built up with running as well, both resilience physically because obviously you're fitter, but also you get that mental fitness. And with running those long distances, there's a huge psychological side to it, isn't there? Because it must be very easy to stop, and to give up when it's a huge distance. 5 kilometers, most of us can get around that some way, but 100 kilometers is a completely different mindset, isn't it?
I think so, yeah. I don't know where it came from. I think I've just always had this mindset to kind of push a little bit further and be curious about how far I can go, and how I can enjoy, like, going through that as well. So
Yeah, it's really important. Whatever you do in any, whatever you do in whatever walk of life, it's so important to love what you do. And I get a real feeling that you love that kind of long distance runner, often solo runner, but presumably sometimes you run, with groups as well. How do you compare that solitary, long distance runner to the, running in a group? Are both things important?
absolutely. I think it's really important to enjoy this big part of my life with others and kind of, yeah, spend time, like, sharing that stoke with them. But, these yeah, I guess expeditions that I do in the remote regions around the world, I've done them with, like, filmmakers and photographers and friends, but also on my own, and there's something different about running through a place where there's absolutely no one for days on end, and yeah, you're just there with your thoughts and really connected to nature and your body, and it yeah, it brings something different to the table, and for me, I really love this feeling and take that back to me with me wherever I go.
Yeah, I mean, we are the podcast talks a lot about sustainability as well, because as a profession, we need to be sustainable, but obviously also the environment. And more now we're making, challenges on the
Mhm.
environment, that it's hard for the environment to be able to pay. pay. Do you see some of that happening, in the mountains where you see the snow melting and so on? And is there a fragility also to the mountains that you notice because you're there, so often as well?
Absolutely, I've seen since I fell in love with the Alps, these 8 years ago, I've seen dramatic changes in, like, the glaciers that are around me here in Zermatt and other parts of the world, and also the weather changes as well, the patterns aren't as stable anymore, so you certainly, yeah, do see that and the changes in, like, the wildlife as well, um, for sure.
There's been a lot of terrible weather events. Almost every week, there's a weather event. Storm Daniel's gone through, uh, with a lot of destruction through Greece, through Bulgaria, obviously also Libya as well. This week when we're recording this podcast, so it is um, it is a worrying time, and I know you blog a little bit about all of your experiences as well. Is that something that you talk about at all in your blogs?
I guess like being aware of the changes that are happening in nature and trying not to make too much of an impact on that myself is important, but it's also change and there's nothing, or I guess there's only so much that we can do. So living our lives like stressing about what's changing around us doesn't really help to improve things. So just being aware and making as
Yeah,
little impact as possible, but also being okay with change, whatever it is all right with me.
yeah, being able to adapt.
Yeah.
Kira, tell us about the favourite races and expeditions you've been on, because I know you've been on a lot, and obviously you do compete in some of these ultras, and I know
Hmm.
you do really well on those. Tell people a
Thanks.
little bit about some of the successes you've had in the races and the expeditions.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite races is the Ultra Tour Monte Rosa. It's a run around Monte Rosa here in the Swiss and Italian Alps, and I won that a few years ago, and it's just incredibly beautiful and brutal simultaneously. So that's one of the favorite races I've done. But what's inspired me more over the last few years is actually going on some expeditions and doing like remote running over multiple days in mountain environments where there's not a lot of people, and you're just covering a lot of ground each day and a lot of vertical meters and going places where, yeah, it's really difficult to get unless you're an endurance runner. So this has been really, yeah, magical experiences for me, especially the ones that I've done in Nepal's Himalayas, the Caucasus Mountains, some regions of the Alps as well in Switzerland, and also in the Middle East in the desert mountains.
I know you were talking about film crews sometimes following you on these things. I mean, they need to be pretty good runners to keep up with you. I'm presuming they're going in cars and dipping in and dipping out of the expeditions rather than trying to keep up with you, Kira.
Sometimes I snag some really good ones that can keep up, which is great. There's not many of them out there, and yeah, but it can be a bit of a logistical challenge when you're trying to do these crazy things, but also take make some content out of it and some art out of the project as well, so we can tell our stories. And yeah, so that has been a mission at times where we've had to use like helicopters and cars and stuff to get people where they need to be.
It's um, it's brilliant to hear these adventures because obviously I think that we can also learn so much from them as well. And obviously, all of this costs money. And I know you've got some really kind sponsors.
Mhm.
On running, obviously, quite a famous apparel and shoe manufacturer as well. I know they've been really supportive. You must go through a fair number pair of trainers when you're running several hundred miles a week.
Yeah, that's funny you mentioned that. On the shelf just beside me right now, Anthony, there's, I don't know, maybe like 50 pairs of shoes, um, that I rotate between. So, yeah, it's probably the biggest part of my wardrobe, my shoe collection. And yeah, super happy to have on supporting me in these projects.
And you always have a favorite pair of shoes as well, which you keep hold of probably for a bit longer than you should because they're just so comfy.
Yeah. yeah, I have like maybe like 20 pairs of the same one that they're just so good. I can't get rid of them when they're ready to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But obviously, also running in the mountains, it's really important to have the right apparel on. I remember when I did my first marathon, and I can't even talk about how amateurish I was, but even things like I discovered I'd not run very far before I did a first marathon, which was really foolish. And at about 13 miles out, I realised how chapped my nipples were. And
Oh
luckily, there was a
no.
John St John's ambulance person, and I got loads of Vaseline and sort of Vaselined up and managed to stop them chafing. I mean,
Yeah.
on your long, long distance, I don't want to get too personal, but I'm sure there are some preparations you have to make to sort of keep the body from falling apart. And
Yeah,
the skin,
definitely.
as a dermatologist, I care about skin.
Okay, for sure. Yeah, there I think I've got my pack dialed pretty well for these like multiple day runs now. But the things that I never leave home without are sunscreen, of course, wet wipes, and also I have like a tennis ball that I'll take with me on every expedition because your muscles get tight and you run into like injury problems from overuse, and just getting to the end of the day and like rolling on the floor with a tennis ball can help like massage all the knots out and make it possible to keep going day after day.
Oh, I like that tip. I was saying
Yeah.
before on another podcast how I love doing the podcast and the webinars because if I learn one thing from them that will take me into my that I can use in my clinical practice, then that's that's a successful podcast or webinar. But in the running, so with the tennis ball, is that sort of on legs and in back and things that you will, and will you
Yeah.
lie on the tennis ball and then just move around on the tennis ball?
Yeah, like the butt, the glutes especially.
Yeah, I've got
Yeah.
a tender small at the back at the moment, so I will be using
Um,
that trick.
yes, it's like the black roll or the foam roller, but a tennis ball is more manageable to take in a small pack, so does the trick.
Yeah. I on, of course, do a lot of apparel. I mean, when you look at the way that clothing has improved, for mountaineers and runners over the last 50 years, it's massive, isn't it? Because being comfortable does allow you to go further, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And in like the extreme environments that I'm running in, where it's down to sometimes minus 20 and snow, it's really helpful to have a brand that supports me and will make things especially for me to keep warm in these environments. So, like the merino thermals and
Yeah.
down jackets and stuff that I have been super helpful, yeah, to get through and not freeze to death.
And hands as well, presumably. My
Mm.
hands struggle in the cold. You've really got to make sure you're not losing heat from the hands and the head as well, haven't you?
Yes, definitely. When I used to locum in the UK, I had to wear like big, thick gloves in the morning before I'd be working in the clinic because they'd be so cold. It would take like some hours for them to like really get nimble again. And you've got to do surgery by like
Yeah.
10 or 11 a.m. So, yeah, gloves are important.
And obviously, also with you going in rather inaccessible places, perhaps where they've not even been mapped very well. I
Mhm.
know one of your other sponsors is Fat Map, and presumably they help to make sure that you don't get lost wandering around the Himalayas.
Yes, a super helpful tool for making sure that yeah, I can actually prepare my trails because yeah, they're not always the ones you find on most maps, and to be able to look at yeah, what the topography is like, if it's passable as well, or if there's going to be too much snow or a river crossing or something. Having these tools has been really useful.
Yeah. And even presumably the ultras, the paths aren't always as clear. One of my recurring dreams is always going the wrong way, even in a 10K or something,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
I'm never at the front. so that's not particularly a problem. But yeah, you've really got to have the navigation skills, even on the competitive, ultras as well, don't you?
Yeah, for sure. I've definitely been lost in an ultra before and had to like run back and make up some kilometers again, and that can either like make
Yeah,
you or break you. So it's better just to know where you're going.
I
Yeah,
think that.
but mistakes make miles.
Yeah, it's interesting. That sort of, well, it's a frustration, isn't it? And once you get frustrated and you're thinking about the past rather than the present and the future, then it must psychologically it can mess with your head a bit, can't it, on a run?
Yeah, I think it can psychologically mess with your head, or it can provide fuel for um, even doing better. So
Yeah,
it's just our perspective, right?
yeah, brilliant. One of our words, our value words, is innovation, and we try and do things in innovative ways at Webinar Vet. And one of the things that I'm really fascinated about within the pet industry, but also in the human industry, is all the wearable tech. And I
Hmm.
know that you're pretty wired up when you go for a run, well, aren't you? Because knowing that sort of information, like sort of your heart rate and so on, can really help you know at what levels to run at as well. And I think is that fourth frontier are providing you with a lot of your wearable tech.
Yeah, I actually had a bit of a funny ECG a few years ago, and got my heart checked. It was a little bit larger than normal because of all the running that I'm doing. So I started wearing Fourth Frontier, which is a heart rate monitor, but it also tracks like my ECG, and heart rate variability and body shocks. So I can better know what's going on with my body, and learn to read it a little bit better, which is really interesting when I'm running like long and especially at high altitude as well, where things are things change and we're putting more pressure on our system.
Yeah. I must admit, I wore these a bit when I was running a bit more competitively, and it's very much knowing your levels. During the run, if you try and run at 100% the whole time, then you don't run very far. So, when you're doing
Yeah.
your treks and your ultras, what sort of level of the heart rate are you at for most? And obviously, it will presumably go up over time. But what are you trying to? What level are you trying to be at?
Yeah, I guess just like zone two, usually. My coach used to say, go for your long runs so you can have conversational German at the time. And my German's not very good, so that means got keeping it pretty easy.
Yeah,
Yeah, casual pace. But
yeah,
again,
yeah.
when you're at high altitude, you can be going pretty easily and still huffing and puffing a lot.
Well, one of my things that I'm sort of most proud of is I managed to get up Kilimanjaro again about 20 years
Nice.
ago. And
Congrats.
just that last point, that was, I didn't run up. I didn't run up, Kira. It was a very, as the Swahili, the Tanzanians say, pole, pole, slowly, slowly.
Ah,
But
nice.
even, at that level, which is nearly 6,000 meters, just walking a couple of kilometers took me a couple of hours because you do move that slowly. So the fact that you're, at high altitude and running again is amazing. So it's not only an ultra, it's an ultra at altitude.
Yeah. Uh, I don't know. I don't know. I like discomfort, I guess. But yeah, it makes me feel so alive to be in these places, that are really inhospitable, and yeah, pushing my body and minds to the limits. I come back from these like with a really full cup. So yeah, that's why I keep doing it, I think.
Of course, presumably the mountain training acclimatizes you so that when you do go down, I think a lot of the work showed that people's oxygen capacity increases so you can then, you're fitter when you're back down at sea level, aren't you? Or at
Yes.
Zermatt, which is obviously high, but probably not as high as the Himalayas.
Yeah, you have about 6 weeks of feeling really good after you come back from high altitude training. It's pretty magic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
brilliant. Obviously, you're doing all of this stuff, but I know you're still keeping your hand in the veterinary field, and obviously, um, you've started a telemedicine company based in Hong Kong, which is where you were living, I think, before Switzerland, wasn't it? Tell
Yes,
us a little bit
correct.
about what's got you into the telemedicine field.
Yeah, sure. Um, well, I guess it started way back when I had my first job, and I just couldn't fit in anymore the ultra running and the travel with the high altitude ultra running, along with a full-time like veterinary job. And for a long time, I was questioning whether veterinary was the career I should have taken, because I have this big passion outside of that as well, and I couldn't combine them, like the stress of both. So, yeah, started locuming, and then traveling the world, and was spending more and more time in the mountains, where I couldn't locum as a vet. So I started working for a telemedicine company a few years ago, and just was like overwhelmed by how appreciative clients were for having this service. And then when I moved to Hong Kong, I realized that this service wasn't available in so many countries still. And yeah, in Zermatt as well, like very inaccessible to vet clinics. So I started my own. And I think I've always
Yeah,
had this passion for startups as well. So it really fits to be able to use my abilities as a vet, and my profession still, but also go down the startup road, especially having creating jobs that are more flexible for vets like myself that don't fit into the status quo of what a vet surgeon used to be.
and I suppose startups and doing ultra running is not that much different because the ultra run you've got to sort of think and plan, kind of decide that there's going to be different stages of that journey. It very much, they're both journeys, aren't they, where you know that
Definitely.
you will have to prepare to be able to do the ultra run, and then obviously you hope that you'll have a success at the end. But of course, a lot of um, startups fail because of poor planning, or that it was just the wrong time, or people didn't put enough effort in. It is it's a high risk sort of profession. When you go out and do a 5K, you're pretty confident you'll be able to drag yourself around, but 100K, there's a lot of doubt in there. Well, there probably isn't for you, because you presumably have to believe that you're going to get to the end of the 100 kilometers, but it's less likely than you doing a 5K, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that can happen in a 100-kilometer race, or a multi-day run, in the mountains. But yeah, having this belief in yourself is important, and just going into things with endurance and grit, and I don't know, a curiosity as well. I think you're either gonna succeed or you're gonna learn a lot along the way anyway. So, um, and I like to bite into to big challenges.
Yeah, I think one of my mentors said to me one time, there's no such thing as failure. If something's a success, from a monetary perspective or whatever, if it's not a success from a monetary perspective, if you've done something like a startup, or you've tried to run a 50K or a 100K race, almost certainly you will have learned things that you'll be able to take into your future life, and
Mhm.
that makes it. It's a much more positive way of looking at things, because failure then, um, in some ways never happens, because you learn even when things don't quite go well, don't you?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Kira, I could probably talk for hours, but I know you probably haven't got that time because I'm sure you're about to go out for a long run or something. It's been a big thrill for me to be able to speak to you and talk about all the fantastic things you're doing, with your running. But also, I think it's a great example of, uh, that people talk a lot about shortage of vets and so on, but there are so many jobs that vets can do, within and without the profession. I think we're in danger sometimes of tossing people away or maybe people leaving the profession without realizing how flexible the profession can be. And you seem like a fabulous example of that.
Well, thank you so much, Anthony. Yeah, that means a lot. Like, yeah, I think if we don't fit into the mold of what a veterinary associate is or owning our own clinic, then there's absolutely ways we can carve our own path, instead of leaving the profession, because it is so unique and so beautiful. So I hope that, yeah, I can inspire others to also, yeah, just think about how it's going to fit them in a way that works.
Brilliant. And Kira, if you're over in the UK at any time, feel free to come up to Crosby and do the park run with me. I'm not going to say I'll keep up with you, but it would be lovely to meet.
Absolutely, that would be a
If 5K
pleasure.
is long enough, we maybe you could go out an hour earlier and just jog around the beach for a bit.
I'll run to the start.
Kira, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. And
Very cool. Thank
yeah, good
you.
luck with the future, with the runs, and obviously the telemedicine company vetli.com. That's VTLI.com. But we'll put some of your social media and so on underneath the podcast so people can follow you and see what you're getting up to.
Perfect. Sounds great. Thanks so much, Anthony.
Thanks everyone for listening. This is Anthony Chadwick from the Webinar Vet, and looking forward to seeing you on a podcast very soon. Take care. Bye bye.